man, kids are getting up. Like, I'm talking about, like, their whole life. Like, they're spawn camping themselves. It's like you spawn in Halo, the first thing you do is look at the ground and you throw a grenade. There he is. First thing you do.
Welcome back. Today we're breaking down Galaxy Gas. Who's
Oh,
behind
boy.
it? Is it bad? Is it really just for food? And am I in my old man arc? Because today we're complaining about a TikTok trend, okay? A dangerous trend.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, if the TikTok trend is let's do this thing that makes oxygen stop going to your brain, I feel like that's not a good trend. Like, you don't have to be an old man. You don't have to be a doctor to see that. I can see that right away.
No, the answer is no. I'm very cool, still very hip, still
That's
very
right.
with it, okay? But I did want to talk about
These
nitrous
kids aren't with
oxide
it, though.
today, aka laughing gas,
Yeah.
aka whippets, aka doing a Kanye. Look.
When it's time for Lefty's Losing It, and let's check in with this charming lass. You know, she doesn't have to declare her politics, you know precisely how she votes.
I can help you talk to somebody.
He didn't use his turn signal!
Man, can I please call you an ambulance?
Makasih paham no, saya yang dihitam no.
I do hope that
Ah,
is
jangan
the
dianjing
sunshine,
nih.
but I think
Do you
this
think
is
you
not
are?
the Lefty Losing It. Now to the worst vice president we've had.
Be
Here's
wary.
Kamala
No
Harris.
timeline
Kamala Harris.
exists where Magneto yields.
Now, who am I gonna banish from this match?
When I sang about my friend William, who's 5 years old and wanted a doll to hug at home, I could sing the whole thing.
I think you should sing some now.
If he was a villain in a Western video game, he would not be intelligent, he would not be well-spoken, he would not be clever, he wouldn't be able to discover the king's magic.
Do you think I'm getting fat?
No, you're...
The right heroes could make all the difference.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Doom: The Dark Ages. the next installment in the long-running Doom franchise. Of course, this time bringing a sort of medieval spin on it as a prequel to Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Before we get into all that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. But with that in mind, a couple more things to note. Obviously, this is going live ahead of the game's early access period, even if you bought the deluxe edition or whatever, which is of course possible because I was provided a review key by Xbox, and what's more, I actually attended a preview event for it back in March, so there's all that for you. Now, in the case of Doom the Dark Ages, when it comes to 100% on this, a couple things to note. One of the achievements is actually bugs, at least on Steam specifically, because in the game itself, you can actually access a sort of milestone system that shows all of your accomplishments, which is mostly just the achievement list, but there are actually a few extras in it. And through this milestone list, I confirmed that I did in fact complete the Berserker achievement, mind you, but never popped on Steam, so I assume there's some sort of issue with how those two are communicated, so definitely wanted to mention that, but obviously it's not going to hold up a review. What's more, while the achievement list is pretty thorough in terms of covering all the content and grabbing all the collectibles, which is the bulk of it, the in-game milestone system does have a few extra things that the achievements do not cover, specifically beating the game on a higher difficulty. In fact, for beating the game on the highest difficulty, you get the Conqueror skin, which is this gold skin for your character that you can use in subsequent playthroughs. Now, obviously you can see on screen here that I've unlocked it, but that's not as difficult as it might initially seem for reasons we'll get into in the difficulty section. Because let's first talk about what this game is. So obviously, prequel to the more recent Doom titles, this time it's got more medieval spin, specifically because we are cutting through some of the Doom Slayer's time with the main as we rip and tear our way through the classic hordes of demons. But I don't want to go into that too much, simply because obviously we're ahead of release here and I don't want to spoil the campaign for people, and to that end, I'm not going to show much beyond the few opening cinematics for the first few levels, but what I am going to show is a few of the later levels past those, just to kind of show you what's available variety-wise, but I wanted to mention that because obviously I don't want to be spoilers, and there may well be some contextual stuff in the footage that you may or may not consider as spoilers or be able to. But with this change in timeline, as far as the modern two games go, it's also worth to mention that it comes with a bit of a shift in philosophy as well, with this game aiming to capture the sort of flow of the original games while adapting a stand-and-fight philosophy, meaning that just because you're going toe-to-toe with a particularly large demon doesn't necessarily mean that what you want to do is run and gun or just back up and shoot, that kind of stuff, because very often your best bet, thanks to a few of the mechanics we'll talk about later in the video, is usually to just actually stand there and go blow for blow with these characters, trading melee hits and trying to parry and block and everything else. And while that part is pretty fun in combination with the larger open levels that allow you to do a lot of exploring, it does have a slight issue here and there. My biggest one by far being that a lot of emphasis was put on the Atlan mechs and that we're finally able to pilot one, and that there is sort of dropping of multiplayer allowed for that and things like the Cyber Dragons to be added. And yet, in having played this game, I've got to say that the Atlan mech missions in particular are kind of underwhelming. It's basically just a punch combo system as you walk through what is essentially a linear corridor, fighting some Titan demons as you go. That's kind of just it. It never evolves, it changes over the entire course of the game, and while it's cool the first time, it gets stale pretty much immediately afterwards. So frankly, there's some good and some bad, as you would expect with basically the technical state of this game. So quite a few things to mention here, but let's start with the problematic stuff. So in addition to the review key that they sent over, they did give me access to a pre-release NVIDIA driver that was used for the game, obviously. So that's a thing with review keys where sometimes they are making those for drivers that have not yet been released publicly, and so they made that driver available to me and I was using that. So just as a mention, do remember to update your drivers for this game because you might have problems otherwise. But beyond that, there's two things I want to mention. The game did crash on me one time over the course of about 30 or so hours, but perhaps the slightly more annoying issue is that sometimes whatever objective you are currently on in your current mission can sometimes sort of stall out, and for whatever reason, like a door in a linear corridor might not open or something like that, and you're forced to reload to a point in order to fix that, which, to be fair, does usually fix it. But on the other difficulties, like Pandemonium and Ultra Nightmare, where if you want to reload, you have to just restart the level you are currently on, that can be incredibly frustrating, which did happen twice. Now, the other technical stuff I want to mention is equally important, but mostly just for the sake of knowing. And this is the fact that Doom: The Dark Ages does require a ray tracing graphics card, which basically means a 20 series or higher. And while I can appreciate that might be an annoyance for some people, in fairness to basically every developer, at some point we're going to have to drop support for the roughly 10,000 series cards. But given the pricing of the new stuff, it's no small wonder that people are paying for older GPUs. What's more, the game does feature a host of accessibility options. All sorts of stuff. You can change the color coding that you're going to see, and like we have seen up to this point in the video, you can change colors on things like Alteri indicators and basically anything else you see on the screen. You can adjust a lot of that stuff. I think they did a pretty good job with the accessibility options here, so just bear that in mind as you watch some of the footage. Next up, let's talk about difficulty. So when you fire up Doom: The Dark Ages and start a brand new campaign, you're going to be met with a list of preset difficulties followed by the modifiers. Now, the presets include Aspiring Slayer through Nightmare for the sort of base difficulties, and then Pandemonium and Ultra Nightmare could largely be considered a slightly separate thing. This is because Aspiring Slayer through Nightmare can basically be sort of fully customized via the modifiers, whereas Pandemonium and Ultra Nightmare have some things you cannot adjust via the modifiers. Specifically, Pandemonium and Ultra Nightmare are essentially Iron Man modes, with the difference being that in Pandemonium, it's Nightmare by default, and then you can, if you have life sigils, which are effectively like revives, when you die, you can go ahead and restart the capture. Whereas in Ultra Nightmare, if you die, the campaign ends, and the life sigils you normally would be picking up only act as a health pickup instead. But this next page is difficulty modifiers. So this stuff is available pretty much regardless of what difficulty preset you pick. So outside of some stuff behind the scenes, that is always the case. You can fundamentally change and alter whatever you'd like to your heart's content, and this is why beating Ultra Nightmare is not as daunting as it might initially seem. Because while it is a sort of preset, you can go in here and alter very specific aspects of it to make it as easy or even as more difficult as you would prefer. And so how difficult or easy this thing is largely comes down to the player. But personally, as a big fan of the difficulties, I really think this is the right way to go. But I'm fully aware other people have their own thoughts on this. Next up here, we have the story setup. So as I've already mentioned, we are playing through some of the Slayer's time with the Night Sunrise. And I don't want to get too into the specifics to avoid spoilers here, but I am going to go over the sort of basic setup. The Slayer is being used by the Makers to, of course, confront an ongoing war with the demons, and specifically to combat some of the invasions, with the demons largely targeting energy sources in this particular section of the galaxy. And as you begin fighting off these invasions, it becomes quickly apparent that a lot of these demons are being led at the direction of a sort of adversary that you'll come toe-to-toe with over the course of the game, which is going to see you slaughtering your way through Ragnarok and Now, I don't really want to say more than that at this time, again, simply for the sake of spoilers, but I will say that there was some stuff at the end that caught me a bit off guard that I thought was particularly interesting, and by and large, I enjoyed the story quite a bit. With it taking place over 22 chapters, a couple of those being Atlan and sort of dragon-related missions, we'll talk a bit more about this in the gameplay section, but as I've already mentioned, the Atlan missions in particular felt a little underwhelming. Moving on to our progression systems, however. As we make our way through the game's various levels, we're going to be picking up all sorts of stuff, various currencies, items we can use for upgrades. We're also going to be picking up new weapons, ripping essences straight from demons, and hopefully completing some mastery challenges when you fully upgrade a weapon. So let's start with the basic one, the weapons. You come into all of these at set moments in time as you progress through the campaign. You can't really miss them, they're all going to be directly put into the path as part of the main story. And ultimately there is 12 of them. Most of them are divided into classes. That is to say, a type of weapon that uses a particular bit of ammo, such as the shell class or shotgun, or the spike class or plasma class, that kind of thing. So for instance, we get a combat shotgun and then the super shotgun. We get a regular plasma gun or the sort of twin-barreled version of that same plasma gun as a couple of examples. Now, it's not so much that any of these are really better than similar, but rather that they simply function differently. And you can swap between whichever weapon that you want, mind you, as you do have all 12 of them with you, but generally they're divided into classes, which share an ammo type, and then you sort of hot swap between them as you go. Now, each of these weapons can be upgraded with the various currencies: gold, rubies, and wraithstone. So the initial upgrades are typically gold, the middle ones are rubies, and then the final one is the wraithstone. Once you've completely maxed out a weapon, though, you'll then unlock its mastery challenge. Usually some objective with whatever that upgrade gave you as you made the weapon better. So, for instance, the plasma guns start shocking enemies, and you have to hit some of the enemies with that damage type. The grenade launcher has secondary cluster bombs that will drop with its upgrade, and you have to damage enemies with those cluster bombs, as a couple examples. Now, the reward for completing the mastery challenges is, in fact, the golden skin for that weapon. Secondary to your regular weapons is your shield and your melee weapons. So your shield starts as a basic shield that you'll simply be able to parry with, but I believe it's the second mission, so very early on you get access to the shield saw, allowing you to throw your shield, which allows you to shatter superheated metal, which is one of the big gameplay elements both in combat and traversal. Now when it comes to upgrading your shield, you can upgrade the base of it, and then also runes that you'll pick up in some of the later bits of the game. So runes cause your parry of Hell Surge, or the things you can actually parry, that is, at least most of the time. Some of them are just regular attacks, but Hell Surge attacks, when you parry them, will trigger your runes that you are currently using on your shield, and this will produce extra effects, like ground fissures, an auto turret to activate, a stunning holy bolt, all that stuff. So each of those individual runes can also be upgraded, and this uses the same currency as the other stuff, as do the melee weapons. Melee weapons, there are just 3 of, but it's your basic power gauntlet, the flail, and then the dread mace. The dread mace I didn't really enjoy. It's only got 1 charge, and it's real slow to activate, which just didn't feel good to me. The gauntlet and the flail are pretty good. You could just kind of choose whichever one you want to use there, but given that the game is called the Dark Ages, I think the correct answer is the flail. Another thing you'll be upgrading along the way, though, is simply your health and base armor. So this is essentially done by just killing enemy leaders, which will then see you ripping out their essence and using it to empower yourself, which of course increases the associated stats. This is health armor mostly, and then you can also increase the ammo capacity for the various ammo types as you use it as well. The vast majority of these essence upgrades are along the critical path, that is to say stuff that you can't really miss, with only like 1 or 2 of the health and armor upgrade being off the critical path. What you see much more in an optional encounter with these leaders is the ammo upgrades, just as a bit of an aside. But that's pretty much it as far as progression systems go, so let's move on to the gameplay and work. As I mentioned briefly earlier, the game takes place across 22 different chapters. These chapters can largely be divided up into a few different types. Your sort of traditional Doom levels, your more open-ended levels, and then the Dragon and Admin levels. Now the Dragon ones are a little more complicated because the Dragon missions typically just see you occasionally riding the dragon while also getting off on foot and exploring various places as well. So the Dragon missions are usually simply a part of other levels. The other missions, though, are pretty much all on the these are the ones I did not like. As I mentioned, it's basically just some basic punch stuff. You dodge out of the way when it's time to dodge, which gives you a temporary bonus to all of your attacks and damage. It's very easy, it's not engaging, it's cool like one time, but after that, not so much. The Dragon, I think they did a much better job with. Mostly because, yes, you can fly around and explore with the Dragon. You can also find the occasional secret landing spot in those missions, so you can actually find some secret stuff associated with exploring with the Dragon, even though you hop off afterwards and explore on foot typically. There's also stuff to do while flying the Dragon, such as shooting various ships, finding the woods, or simply fighting the various enemies or ships you'll come across. Now, admittedly, the actual combat of these Dragon sections is also not great, as it is effectively the same thing, just a sort of time to dodge, which empowers your attacks, which allows you to burst through shields. So it's also not incredibly engaging as far as combat goes, but the rest of it is fun enough to make up for it, I think. Now, you'll be spending most of your time on foot, though, so let's talk a little bit about that. As we move through any individual level, we're obviously going to be battling our way through hordes of demons, but we'll also be collecting a lot of stuff, gold for starters, which is one of the primary resources for upgrades. Finding secret areas which usually leads to collectibles such as toys, which you can then view from the main menu, skins for your various weapons, as well as bits of the codex, giving you background lore and characters you'll run into, or places you happen to be exploring, that kind of stuff. And you're going to find all of that naturally by exploring. A lot of that exploration does involve a bit of running around, particularly solving some light puzzles or doing a little bit of platforming. Now, this is not nearly as intensive, let's say, as Doom Eternal's platforming, and you do stay relatively on the ground, so to speak, but a lot of these puzzles do involve utilizing your shield, specifically your shield saw, in order to traverse through the typically throwing your shield. So there are bits of superheated metal throughout both on enemies, so in combat distance to the walls, you can throw your shield at it in the shadow, and then that will typically say something to be like a block or whatever to push it for you. So you can scramble your way up, whatever, do a little bit of platforming as you make your way through places. So there's a little bit of that stuff, but it's not over the top or anything. And thankfully, the auto map is pretty good about showing you where the various items are, which makes it pretty easy to make sure that you fully explore the level before moving on, which makes it very possible to do all of the achievements in one run as long as you don't want the skins and stuff from doing the harder difficulties. Now, another thing that tends to come with these missions, though, once you get to a certain point, is actually mission challenges. These typically involve performing some task, usually killing demons in a certain way, but also occasionally finding some optional stuff, such as, for example, in the Big Siege mission, taking out various bits of artillery that are scattered throughout, and the reward for completing these challenges is usually the same stuff, like skins or extra gold for upgrades, that kind of stuff, just to give you a little bit more direction to your wandering. Now, naturally, all of that is sort of broken up then by the combat that you'll be having, and pretty much all of that. So you do get the occasional sort of moments of really just helping you puzzle out, like where to go or how to find any secret stuff. So it's not like a non-stop onslaught or anything. You do have the occasional moment to breathe. But I did want to mention before we transition to combat here, simply that I like the sort of mix of missions here. Outside of the Atlan stuff being a little disappointing, I enjoyed going from missions that were a little more on rails to then getting missions that were opened up and more freeform exploration, where you could sort of pick and choose whether to just follow the actual main objective or fully explore the level in a proper completionist type approach, which I really enjoyed, obviously. And it was just really fun to run through a lot of these levels, especially some of the ones in the later parts of the game that do some interesting stuff that I'll be curious to see how people react to be honest. Now, as we move into the combat section, I want to start this by saying that if you've watched the channel already, the main thing I'm known for is covering big RPGs. I typically play and review these games as a break from all the big RPGs, and one of the things you'll hear me say is that sometimes it's fun to just shoot stuff, and while that remains true, that is in large part why I like to play these games every once in a while, I do think in the case of Doom: The Dark Ages, that statement could be a little bit of a reduction of what's going on here. In fact, I think the combat here, now that I've experienced the full game, has a lot of different mechanics, and it really clicked with me in a big way. Like, I kind of just got it. And while I'm not claiming to be a savant or anything, and I'm sure there will be a million people much better at this than I am, one thing that is really fun about these types of games is that there tends to be a moment where you're just like, oh, I get it. And you suddenly find yourself trying to pick the most efficient way to destroy all of these various hordes of demons. In particular, though, I started my first playthrough on normal, which is what I usually do for most games, and then I'll up the difficulty as required for later playthroughs if they are required, that kind of thing, and then see where it goes from there. But in the case of Doom: The Dark Ages, about halfway through the game, I kind of realized that even on normal, I was just destroying everything, so I went ahead and messed around with the difficulty modifiers to then, of course, make the game more difficult. And that experience is actually what led me to being like, oh, I could definitely do that Ultra Nightmare, I think. As my initial plan going into this was just going to be like, if it was too difficult or I just couldn't quite manage it, to just put out a regular review, since this is a little outside my no more genre anyway, plus all the difficulty modifiers they let you deal with. I was more than happy to just let this one be whatever it was going to be. But then, as I mentioned, it just sort of clicked, and I found myself having a ton of fun with this, to the point if actively looking for a greater challenge. Now, I wanted to start the combat section by mentioning that because obviously the combat here is a pretty big shift from 2016 and Eternal. I am not as familiar with those games, and honestly I don't even need to be to tell you that change is never universally liked, and people that liked the combat in those games a great deal might not like the change in approach here, or vice versa, you know? Happens all the time. So I'm well aware opinions on this will be split to some degree. But for example, I've played a lot of games where parrying was a really big mechanic, so having to do that here effectively with your shield with a parry window that is by default much more generous than basically any Souls-like, that was not a significant deal to me, and if anything I kind of felt right at home doing that because I play a lot of games where that's a requirement. And then from there it was just a matter of sort of cycling through which weapons would be the best for any given situation. For instance, if you're fighting enemies with shields, you want to, as quickly as possible, superheat them, throw the shield at them. If they have plasma shields, you want to use a plasma weapon to overload those shields, which then produces an AoE. You can also use your shield saw to throw it directly into a larger enemy, effectively stunning them and taking them out of the fight for a second, provided they don't have armor. A lot of armor can be smashed to bits by the flail, as an example. Other types of weapons have various effectiveness against types of armor as you try to superheat it to throw your shield in it to destroy it more quickly. And there's basically just all of these sort of little micro decisions you have to make as you work your way through any given combat encounter, and that is the part that I really enjoyed about it, and why I said much earlier that I think it's a bit of a reduction to simply call it just shooting things, which to be fair is true of most first-person shooter titles. It just really bears an explanation here. But let's dig in a little more on the melee system in particular. So obviously there's a parry mechanic, but you can also just activate your melee attack. This is typically done via melee charges. Both the gauntlet and the mace have 3 base charges each. I believe it's the mace can actually get 4 charges if you successfully parry as you are going back and forth, so you can get a bigger combo there. But as you parry, in general, you can instantly get back melee charges to keep going toe-to-toe with an enemy. Now every time you melee an enemy, they're going to typically drop like health and armor, which is going to keep you from dying as you go toe-to-toe with an enemy, in addition to simply parrying their attack. Now where this gets tricky though is that while you can stand toe-to-toe with an enemy, the other enemies don't just like stop while this is going around, meaning that you will actively be attacked by everybody else around you at the same time. Which means you need to not only be aware of the enemies that you are standing and fighting against, but also everything else around you. And that, combined with the sort of melee aspect of the shield and the ability to shield charge and use it to stun enemies to create distance, that kind of thing, means that a lot of combat to me, while obviously having a bit of a melee focus, is really all about creating distance and closing distance as you need to, in order to sort of maintain control of everything that is happening around you, which is then itself a sort of byproduct of the combat that the game itself takes advantage of later on. For instance, there's enemies that in the later stages of the game will actually throw up a shield if you get too far away from it, becoming immune to damage, and it only drops that shield when you get close enough for it to melee attack you, at which point it starts swinging pretty mercilessly. And while that might sound annoying, it's really not as bad as it seems, because you can actually just create some distance, force that thing to shield up, at which point it does some basic projectile attacks that are easy enough to dodge, so you can clear out the other enemies around it before focusing on this thing with its wild melee swings that are difficult to deal with on top of other enemies swarming you, as an example. Now some other things to be aware of, again, the superheated metal. Some enemies have armor, typically the bigger enemies. You're going to have to punch through that armor. There are certain weapons that just deal better damage to armor generally, and then when it gets superheated, if you keep attacking it really break, the easiest thing to do is to shield that break faster. Probably worth a mention that the glory kills aren't nearly as much of a thing here. It does happen occasionally, so when you deal enough damage, typically the bigger enemies who have the health for it, they can occasionally become dazed, at which point you can sort of strike them, which typically disables a weapon or so at first, but then once they get close to the death, it's like a sort of proper glory kill that isn't quite as prevalent as it was in the previous games because of the melee system, which already allowed you to sort of get a breather to deal against parries. Also, I can mention that those melee attacks typically use too much your ammo for every weapon, so you simply having to find pickups. which gives you yet another reason to sort of have a little back and forth with closing the distance and then creating that distance when you want to use your weapons. But with all of that said, I mean, the rest of it is stuff you've probably seen on screen up to this point. It's really just about learning the best practices for any individual situation. Like the basic fodder demons, there's really no point in wasting ammo on them. A shield throw will kill them all immediately, so will a shield charge as long as they don't have a literal shield that you can punch through, which I've already discussed how to deal with. The bigger demons usually aren't a huge deal, outside of simply learning how to minimize the damage they deal to you so you can deal with them as quickly as possible. With a lot of the challenge that comes up in the later levels being just the variety of waves of these guys that get thrown at you and the different combinations therein, but you have access to everything around you. But if all else fails, you can pull out the UFC this time around and clear some things out very, very quickly. But if I were to sum up combat a little more succinctly, I had a blast with it. I think you can create exactly the level of challenge you're comfortable with all of the modifiers and everything. I think it's pretty plain to see that a lot of effort went into things like the melee system plays out, which I wound up enjoying a lot more than I thought. And like I said, towards the beginning of this section, something about this system just really clicked with me, and I kind of just got it, which made for a really, really enjoyable time. Finally, moving on a bit though, let's then talk about the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck is a hard no in this one. That is largely because the GPU it has is not really compatible with what this game pulls. As an example, the Steam Deck has roughly comparable 10 series cards, and while yes, it can technically do ray tracing, I just literally could not get this game to work on the Steam Deck. The second I would load it up, it just immediately crashed every time. So, I mean, never say never, I guess, but as it stands, I couldn't get this to work on the Steam Deck literally at all, so wouldn't expect to have a good time there, but I guess we'll see what happens in the future. Which brings us to positives, negatives, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So, on the positive side of things, we obviously have the combat. All of the various modular difficulty options that go in there. I honestly thought the story was pretty good. I enjoyed the exploration. I enjoyed the very medieval vibe of it, which is something I enjoy frequently anyway. So perhaps surprisingly, the main focus of what this game is about is what it excels. But there are nonetheless some negatives. So primarily, just straight away the Atlan missions. I don't think they're very fun. I think it was novel literally the very first time I did it. Every subsequent time just incredibly boring slog. And to be honest, it's kind of odd to me that they hyped those up as a sort of thing they were able to add because they dropped stuff like multiplayer, but then those Atlan missions aren't anything special at all. They're very basic, especially when compared to the Dragon missions that they added for what I believe was the same reason. And those, by comparison, are a lot more fleshed out and there's more to do and it's just more enjoyable overall as a mechanic. So I guess I'm just confused what the hype there was. But the other negative, this is the kind of game that could use some sort of side challenge mode or even just have like an arena or something to keep the challenge going. And I know Eternal eventually got things like master levels as an example, but here the only thing you can really do is just replay chapters you've already completed as an example, and that's fine. I just really feel like this game could use some sort of extra side mode to allow you to do some other stuff. Like speaking for myself, I think an Endless Horde mode would be super fun here, but as it stands, that's not really enough. And then for a last negative, I deliberately tried not to show much of this, but frankly a lot of the boss fights are a little underwhelming. There's a couple right towards the end that I thought were better done and more interesting, just because they're a little more involved, but basically every boss fight up to that point felt like barely a bump in the road, and I feel like they could have done a better job there with the sort of grandiosity of those encounters. But for me at least, what I enjoyed is playing through the actual levels themselves made up for it, so it wasn't a huge deal at the end of the day. Which then brings me to my conclusion. So, Doom the Dark Ages is $70 US over on Steam. It's also going to be day one on Game Pass, I believe. And for that, you're getting a game with really fantastic combat as far as I'm concerned. I imagine other people will have different opinions on that subject. Cool levels to explore, challenges to complete, and a pretty interesting story that I enjoyed seeing all the way through. But when it comes to recommending it, I would say it's largely going to come down to how much you enjoy this particular iteration of the combat, with the rest being minor quibbles in comparison. So, given how much I had fun with this, obviously it's a buy for me, but again, if $70 is a bit too steep for a game that took me, like, again, 30-ish hours to 100%, Game Pass then seems the likely option, which is probably going to continue to be the case for the foreseeable future, with Xbox having recently announced an increase to their prices up to that $80 base, which is an unfortunate but not really unexpected move. As far as this video goes, though, that's pretty much going to wrap it up, so hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all
By the eye of
down in the
Agamotto!
comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom
Time to
and
switch
have
things
an
up,
amazing
including
day.
which side you're on.
Open your eyes.
The right heroes could make all the difference.
Be wary. No timeline exists where Magneto yields.
And we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. As usual, it's me, Jake Balbino, and today we're talking about Doom, The Dark Ages. This is the latest from id Software, and it's their third in the line of what I would call the kind of modern Doom games. So you have Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, and now this. Each one feels pretty different. They shake things up quite a bit, and this one is a prime example of that. It's the Doomslayer like you've never seen him before, in a world you haven't seen before, fighting a little bit differently. And it absolutely works. I don't know if it's my favorite of the modern 3 games yet. It's got a few downturns, a couple of things, but other than that, this is just a good old-fashioned video game that is really fun to play through. It's a pretty kick-ass ride, and it delivers the goods. It delivers what you want. Sometimes it can just be as simple as that. And just so you know, before we keep going, I've been playing a review copy, and all this footage is captured on PC, and it's spoiler-free. Because first things first, we'll start off with the fact that there is like a story. In the Dark Ages, the Doomslayer at the start is kind of used as a tool. He's like a blunt weapon activated to push back the forces of hell. And in this sci-fi fantasy tinged universe, the Doomslayer still feels consistently like himself for the most part, just this like inhuman wrecking ball brute force rage thing. And it's really everything else around him that takes us getting used to. Now, Doom Eternal experimented with some cutscenes and more advanced alien races and just stuff going on. So if you were kind of weirded out by that, there's a lot more of it here. Dark Ages takes that all a bit further with a full-on cinematic story. Characters come and go, and there are some more reasons given for what you're actually doing. Credit where credit's due. They put a ton of work into this, and there are some big scenes with like a lot of like wow factor. Unfortunately, I just still kind of felt mentally disconnected from them. The characters aren't super memorable, really, other than that they look cool. And the really good moments kind of come few and far between. When it hits, it hits. It's kick-ass. When it doesn't, it's just whatever. Now, this is subjective, of course. It's going to come down to your taste. Visually and production-wise, it is cool as hell. Even if I didn't feel too invested in it, that's okay, because I still appreciate what it did, what it was going for. It feels a little cartoony, kind of goofy and serious, like it's almost like a weird hell sci-fi Power Rangers episode or something. So I really can't hate it. It also just feels like a good early 2000s game throwback story campaign. And you know what? I can at least respect it for that. But this game is all about the gameplay still. Yes, they've introduced some cinematic storytelling, but don't sweat it. Like, you're still mostly in the Doom guy's shoes all the time, just killing shit. The core gameplay is great. I love it. Now, a lot has been said about the gameplay differences of all these Doom games already. It's been a talking point. Doom 2016 was simple and brutal. Eternal got much faster and way more complex. And the Dark Ages marketing has talked about like boots on the ground, stand your ground style combat, with it kind of being the first Doom game with defensive options like a throwable Captain America shield. But in my experience, don't get it twisted, this is still a Doom game through and through. You're still juggling multiple weapons, different ways and reasons to kill different enemies, ammo type, all that, like you're sprinting around super fast, all the time. It's still extremely sweaty and best enjoyed on a mouse and keyboard if you can. I don't know, after reading previews of this game and all the post-launch talk, I was expecting something radically different. What we have here is something that makes really fun and interesting changes to the formula, but it doesn't lose sight of what it is. It's a good mix of the complexities of Eternal and the brutal simplicity of 2016, with it being a little bit crunchier, a little bit punchier, and a little weightier this time around. Some of this is thanks to that shield, so you can throw it at finish puzzles, but you're mostly tossing it towards. It rips through fodder enemies and can actually get stuck in and stun bigger enemies. It can also be used to kind of shield bash towards enemies, and this thing, like a lot of things in the game, evolves as you go, and those are your added hits. But one of the biggest things is that it can be used to parry attacks. Enemies will do certain green attacks that you can deflect back at them, and potentially damage them or open them up to more vulnerable melees. And a lot of enemies will start shooting glowing and non-glowing projectiles at you, leading to you kind of ducking and dodging and knocking back the right projectiles. Some of these attacks coming at you might seem slow and easy to deflect at first in the early levels. You might find yourself kind of unimpressed. But when you have walls and walls of them coming at you from tons of enemies, and enemies right up in your face too, like, it can become really chaotic and sort of like a low-key bullet hell. Almost like an ultra murder version of Returnal or something. Now, melee is also emphasized here, because you can combo hits if you have enough melee charges, and then you can combo right into a finisher. This kind of alters glory kills, making the game more flexible, but the trade-off is that sometimes you just don't get those cool, over-the-top kill animations. But it also means that you're constantly on the move, you're not getting like locked into animations and stuff. There's still plenty of crazy violence here, but the old glory kill system is mixed. I get why they changed it up though, and you might too once you start playing. But there are also melee options, believe it or not, so you can change it up from just your fists with different trade-offs. A notable one, an early one, is the flail, which is slower and slower to charge, but it hits a lot harder. And along with that, the new weapons are fun. Really cool stuff going on here. I won't spoil them all, but I'll give you the basics. There's the Impaler. It's like a longer range, but kind of slow power spike shot. There's the Pulverizer skull weapon you saw in the trailer, which is good for crowd control and kind of makes me feel like I'm playing Serious Sam a little bit. There's the Chain Shot, which just shoots out a long, retractable, spiky ball, depending on how long you hold the trigger. There's a bigger plasma rifle, a new spin on the BFG, and a bunch of other stuff. What's nice is that some weapons are just evolutions of ones you already have, and you can transform them on the fly, almost like firing. Like the regular shotgun switches to the super shotgun, so you can use what you like for what situation, and kind of clean up weapon swapping in the process and not have this roster that's overly full. Great new enemies and some cool boss battles make for like a decent and chaotic combat system. Not quite as like all the time micromanagey hyper fast as Doom Eternal, but like I said before, a little bit crunched. Still, it can like result in a lot of chaos and blood and confusion if you get roughed up. But the gore, the sound effects, the feedback, the surprising amount of destructibility in the environment, and of course the genuine challenge that comes with it can just make it a lot of fun. And it basically just made me look forward to every single fight. It's all going down with music that isn't as memorable as the previous time. I miss composer Mick Gordon, man. His absence here is noticeable. The work here fits within the Doom games, the vibe is there, and it feels like Doom, but none of the themes are as catchy or as memorable as you'd be hoping. I was disappointed in this aspect. It's just music that gets the job done. It doesn't go above and beyond. Now, of the 22 chapters or levels, there are some featuring piloting a giant mech and riding a big old hell dragon thing. These are so freaking cool on paper, but unfortunately, they're just okay. The mech stuff works. Stomping around as a big guy, stepping on demon tanks and destroying buildings and bridges is very cool. It's satisfying, and I always want to feel like Gypsy Danger from the Second Rim. It's just the combat is extremely simple. It's relying on dodging, punching, and then punching enough to build up a super attack, and then you unleash that super attack. It gets a little repetitive fast. But at the very least, I like how it broke up the on-foot sections with just some good, simple, dumb fun. It's just compared to the main combat that is so refined and tightly designed and responsive, the mech stuff just kind of felt like normal basic video game stuff comparatively. Riding the dragon leads to some awesome looking sequences, and it's really easy to control, and it's fun to duck and dive and blast off. It's just a lot of it relies on just simply locking onto an enemy, squaring up with it, and dodging in certain directions depending on what they're throwing at you. Dodge enough properly, and then you're able to shoot them down with charged weapons. This just gets old really, really quick and kills the momentum of feeling like a cool flying dragon. Like, why would you, as a flying thing, want to literally stop mid-air, square up and face your enemy, and then just kind of engage in like an almost dodging minigame, almost like a Beat Saber minigame? It's just not that fun. But again, flying around crazy environments, the kind of optional little chases you can do, the things you can hunt down, and even landing and then hopping off and running around to do something else, like, that stuff is well done. So these new things, the mech and the dragon, they just don't quite stand up to the fun factor of the main combat. At the very least, they're a good way to break up the pacing, but just don't expect them to be world-changing. Now, the other way the game is paced is with some missions that are quite large. It's a bit weird at first to run around an open battlefield as a Doom guy, choosing your battles when you want on your own terms, but I think it mostly works. Sometimes, in larger environments, the enemies feel a little bit dumber than they should, but that's like my only complaint. Thankfully, Doom hasn't gone full open world or anything, believe me, they're not that big. There's only so much wandering around, and to be honest, you wander around in a lot of other Doom games. And while lots of the levels, pretty much all of them, have hidden spots and secret avenues and all these little optional things, only a select few seem to feel really, really big. It's still all distinctly Doom. You're running around looking for armor and health, you're looking for secrets, and even the occasional weapon skin, which actually some of them look really cool. You're finding key cards, all the usual stuff. The added bonus is now currency and stuff for upgrades. You can find and kill more powerful enemies, which are often pretty fun to square up against, and then you earn character health upgrades. And you're also collecting gold and rare rubies as the currency to spend at a shrine on upgrades. The upgrades are for weapons, for your shield, and for your melee. Stuff like letting your chainsaw shield stun enemies longer, or certain guns getting a ricochet effect, or maybe a shotgun blast lighting enemies on fire. Most are worthwhile and provide good combat options. And between these upgrades and the skins and the secrets, I just felt thoroughly encouraged and rewarded to explore. It feels like they got the balance mostly right here. So if you can't tell, I really like Doom: The Dark Ages. It's not just a top to bottom 10 out of 10. Every single thing in this game is great. There's a couple of things that they tried that I don't love completely, but ultimately, this is still just a good video game adventure to play through. I had a hell of a good time, pun intended, I guess, sorry. And with these modern Doom games, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's worth playing through twice. Like, you play through once on like a normal-ish difficulty, which is hard enough, and then play through it again on one of the insane difficulties and really understand some of the nuances of the combat. It once again has that sauce, and I really, really appreciate that. So ultimately, yes, long story short, I definitely recommend it, especially if you love Doom. But that's a before you buy. You know how this goes by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion, and now I want to hear yours down in the comments. What's your experience with Doom? Are you like me? Have you been playing since the OG? Was Doom Eternal your first Doom game? We can talk anything Doom down in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your expectations for the new game. If this video helped you out, seeing the ultra-wide gameplay, maybe helped steer your decision or anything like that, click the like button helps us out. We'd really appreciate it. And if you're new, consider subscribing because we put out videos every single day. But as always, I'm Jake Baldino. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
You're welcome. This is a nice spot.
I appreciate you.
Scratch my back. You're welcome. Team player, that's me.
Thanks.
I'll patch you up.
If there's one thing that's kept the name Doom up near the top of the list of first-person shooters, it's how it's always boldly reinventing being a badass, superpowered, one-man army against the armies of hell. decades ago, we got the original old-school running guns, then a jump-scare-laden horror shooter, then a modern reimagining of that old-school running gun, and then a mobility-focused action shooter in 2020's Doom Eternal. The form that Doom: The Dark Ages takes on is actually one that is very different from Eternal, a game that I rank as one of my favorite shooters of all time. In fact, it's so different that initially I was turned off by the heavier fields of movement, lack of double jump or air dash, and the sheer chaos of having wide open fields and seemingly hundreds of enemies closing in on me from all sides. But a few hours into the 20-plus hour campaign, my arsenal had expanded, the ways in which I could dispatch enemies had diversified, and I'd started to better understand and appreciate what Doom: The Dark Ages was and what it wasn't. By the end of it, I was left grinning like a Doom guy that just picked up a super shotgun as I ripped and tore until it was done. Doom: The Dark Ages campaign is all about setting up the dark sci-fi fantasy vibes. It follows our strong, focused and silent Doom Slayer, Doom 2016. Of course, the Slayer himself is much more than just a vehicle of badassery, so it's not like we're seeing a new side of him or getting any sort of deeper look at this character's origins or motivations. Instead, the Dark Ages story is more about filling in the blanks in the Doom universe, diving into the history of the conflict between humans and demons, and further fleshing out both the faction of humanity defending Sentinels and the deity-like Makers. And in that way, it's not only serviceable, but it also does a good job of taking us to both a wide variety of polished landscapes that includes sci-fi themed medieval castles, and a very welcome trip to the Lovecraftian-inspired cosmic realm, which features a ton of really cool mind-bending puzzles and creepy settings that are different from what we've seen before. Perhaps the best thing about the story is that it no longer feels like it's just the Slayer against the nameless forces of hell. There are human companions that are central to the plot.
Maybe you didn't survive.
It regularly feels like you're fighting alongside humanity in this giant all-out war against the demons. And there's actual intrigue involving the mysterious Makers and their role in this whole conflict. This is the strongest a Doom story has ever been, even if that's not a bar you'd have to double jump over. Besides the setting, the big thing that separates Doom: The Dark Ages from previous entries in the series is the addition of the Slayer's Shield, and all the abilities that come with it. Now, rather than being forced to avoid taking damage by constantly staying on the move and jumping around like a madman, you're often encouraged to charge straight forward into danger with your shield at the ready to either block or deflect enemy attacks. Any attack that is red can be blocked until your shield is depleted, and anything that's green can be reflected with a well-timed guard to not only deal substantial damage, but also stun most monsters it hits. Even on Nightmare difficulty, which is what I played you on, the parry timing is very good. Unfortunately, you can fine-tune it however you like in the menus, along with a ton of other handy difficulty modifiers. The other key shield technique is a charging dash attack that can be used to quickly close distance between you and your enemy. Think the Super Shotgun's grapple into Eternal, only faster, you can use it with any weapon, and it's on a relatively cool cooldown. I know, fun, right? This combination of being able to use the shield both defensively to block and stun, and then offensively to quickly zip in and out is what really elevates the Dark Ages combat to the stratosphere by making it still feel very fast and exciting, even with the removal of things like double jumps, quick dashes, and fast weapon swaps. We get the best of both worlds, in that this Slayer is still extremely mobile, but also feels like a heavily armored tank thanks to loud footsteps and a devastating shockwave when you land from a high jump. The shield's utility doesn't end there either. Eventually, you'll also get the ability to toss the shield out, Captain America style, to instantly decapitate tons of fodder enemies all at once. Or, if you use it against larger enemies, it will continuously buzzsaw into them, keeping them incapacitated for a short while. This is an extremely useful skill, but I found it to be especially potent against the Arachnotron enemies that like to pepper me with a constant stream of non-reflectable bullets. If they're unarmored, I can just toss my shield to stop them from shooting, dash in, and all it takes is a single Super Shotgun blast to ready them for execution. Those abilities are key to surviving tough fights because almost every enemy in Doom: The Dark Ages has some sort of weakness like this, and unlike Doom Eternal, they are rarely weapon specific. There's There's no more switching to the combat shotgun specifically to pop a grenade into a Cacademon's mouth, then swapping to the rifle to snipe the guns off of the Revenant, then swapping between shots of your super shotgun and ballista to quickly burst down a Marauder or other big beefy enemy, etc. That's fun in its own way, and I'm sure there will be those out there like myself who still prefer it overall, but the Dark Ages still manages to find a way to be an absolute blast without requiring a StarCraft Pro's level of APM on the harder difficulties. The enemies are largely the same usual suspects that have been in most of the other Dooms. You've got your Imps, Hell Knights, Mancubi, and the aforementioned Arachnotron, and even the Cyber Demon, all of whom behave as you expect. Others have gotten new facelifts to better match with the new setting, like the Pinky, who's now a mount with a Demon Archer riding him, and the new Cacodemon that hails from the Cosmic Realm. Dark Ages even brings back the Bakery as a mini-boss, and hasn't been seen since 3. Overall, there's a nice variety of enemies, and even those who fought a million times before have a few new tricks to make them fit better in the Dark Ages combat. Speaking of enemies, it's worth mentioning as well that it has exponentially jacked up the number of on-screen enemies relative to the term. When you get a bird's eye view of the battlefield, it truly looks like an all-out war against the minions of hell. This did lead to a bit of frustration for me early on, as I was often getting attacked from behind by enemies that would spawn in without warning, but all it took was some adjustment in how I approached certain combat encounters. I had to make sure that I was using my shield bash, disengage, in addition to engaging to keep them off their back. One noteworthy omission from the Dark Ages is the iconic chainsaw that has been used since Doom 2016 as a way to instantly kill a single enemy and regain ammo in the process. That has been replaced by an all-new melee system that lets you get up close and personal and engage in melee brawls that also restore your. I do miss the satisfaction of sawing an imp or other small enemy in half, but this system works better for what Doom the Dark Ages is trying to achieve by again making you rush towards the fight rather than away from it. The ammo pickups for your melee attack are also much more plentiful than the gas for the chainsaw in either Doom 2016 or Eternal, making me run out of ammo far less, which was something that I very much appreciated. As far as the actual weapons go, the Dark Ages plays around a lot with the look of each weapon given an old-timey flavor, but the functions are generally all the same as what we've come to know and love from the series. All of the satisfyingly punchy stalwarts are accounted for. The combat and super shotguns, an assault rifle that shoots out rail spikes instead of bullets, a plasma rifle, and a long-range single-shot weapon in the form of a satisfying steel ball launcher called the Steel Shot, just to name a handful. The only really unique weapon of the bunch is the Skull Crusher Pulverizer, which sort of behaves like the chain gun, but has a ridiculous spread that can just absolutely shred a football's field worth of fodder enemies. It's a fun weapon that goes great with the Dark Ages' absolutely insane amount of on-screen enemies at once, even though I typically opted to use the shield throw to mow down the hordes of fodder, since there's an upgrade that powers up the shield charge when you do. One interesting twist for how the Dark Ages handles its arsenal is that just about every gun has a sister weapon that uses the same ammo type and can be hot swapped between with the press of a button. So, for example, along with a rocket launcher, there's a grenade launcher. In addition to the aforementioned pulverizer that does a little bit of damage spread out over a wide area, there's a Ravager that concentrates the fire to hit single enemies. It all adds up to a ton of variety in the gunplay, and while I was never forced to swap between my weapons in the same way that I was in Doom Eternal, I still found myself jumping from gun to gun, simply because it's fun. But the absolute best part about the toolbox in the Dark Ages is, and this is a credit to the weapon designers at id, because this is true for just about every Doom game, that every gun retains its usefulness throughout the entire game. Sure, I might have my favorites and gravitate more towards the Super Shotgun, Rocket Launcher, and Steel Shot, but even the early weapons stay relevant once you get some upgrades into them. If I'm low on armor, I can swap to the Combat Shotgun that I upgraded to ignite enemies and make them drop armor shots. If I need health, I can swap to the Ravager to make them bleed health pickups. And if I need to incapacitate an enemy while also dealing damage to others nearby, I can throw my shield into a baddie, shoot the shield, and watch as my bullets ricochet and hit everyone else around. To sweeten the pot, all of these abilities and weapons are sprinkled at a measured pace throughout the campaign. There was never even a chance for the gunplay to get stale because every level would give me a new gun, or a new ability for my shield, or a new melee weapon, or I'd find enough gold to afford a new upgrade at the shop that would alter something I already had in a way that made me want to use it more. and it's this need to upgrade that fed into my desire to explore and find both upgrade currencies and the more traditional Doom collectibles like figurines, weapon skins, and lore pickups. Appropriately, the levels of the Dark Ages welcome that exploration with open arms. While they all vary in size, the smaller stages are still big by the series standards, and the big levels are gigantic. They're huge, open battlefields with tons of secrets, challenging enemy encounters, and more than a few breathtaking vistas. Breaking up all the running and gunning are giant mecha battles and flying sections where you pilot the Space Red. Yes, the Doom Slayer has a name because why not?
Don't mess with the
These
amazing
sections are shallow
Spider-Man!
compared to the rest of the Dark Ages, with the mecha sections amounting to little more than a simple game of dodge, punch, punch, dodge, punch, punch. And the Dragon Bigs are little more than dodge, shoot, dodge, shoot. That said, they're kind of like a turret sequence in that they're infrequent and brief enough to never drag the pacing down, and they at least provide cool moments in the cutscenes that precede and follow them. And then there's the soundtrack. Holy hell. If you've played the Doom game before, you probably know what to expect going in, but even so, it doesn't leave you into it. It's another banger of a heavy metal soundtrack that had me coming back to certain levels after beating the campaign, just turning down all the volume except for the music so I can listen without it being overpowered by the sounds of shotgun blasts, explosions, and beasts. Far from just being more Doom, Doom the Dark Ages is a new flavor of the legendary shooter series that's heavier and more grounded, but no less energetic and exhilarating. The new Shield is an outstanding addition that adds a ton of both offensive and defensive options, and when combined with the extensive arsenal of traditional Doom guns, provides a ton of fun and exciting ways to dispatch the hundreds upon thousands of demons that stand in your way. And on top of that, another pumped up heavy metal soundtrack, backing an excellent weapon, level, and enemy design, and it has once again proven that like a super shotgun blast from point blank range, they don't miss.
Executive Reviews editor Tom Marks here with Mitchell Saltzman to talk a little bit more about his review of Doom the Dark Ages. Mitchell, most people I think know you at IGN as an action fighting game reviewer. You know, why did you want to review Doom Dark Ages specifically, which is, you know, not a departure from what you usually play, the games you're into, but a departure from what you usually review at IGN?
Well, I would say there's two reasons. First reason, Doom has been a big part of my childhood. I remember like going to my friend's house whose dad had it installed on their computer, and like, you know, we'd go, and it was like the first time I was ever blown away by a game of graphics. It also was like just kind of like a conversation you said you'd have at like at school where you're like, oh my god, you played Doom, you can awesome chainsaw people in half. This is real! And then the second reason I would say is, you know, here's the secret. The way that Doom has evolved, especially recently, with ever since 2016, it's kind of become an action game. It really scratches those same itches that a game like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta does. You know, when I'm playing Doom the Dark Ages, my brain is going like 100 miles an hour. I'm like thinking to myself, okay, I'm gonna zip over here, I'm gonna super shotgun this guy, execute him. Oh no, I'm taking damage. I'm gonna, you know, go to these fodder guys over here, you know, get a bunch of health. Then I'm gonna, oh, that guy has a explosive barrel next to him. I'm gonna shoot that, zip over here, etc., etc. It's the same kind of like, you know, thing as Devil May Cry, where like I'm gonna uppercut this guy, jump in the air, attack, jump cancel, attack, jump cancel, knock him away, pull him back, slam him down. It's that feeling of having your brain just constantly go. And that's what I've always really loved about the action game genre, and Doom really scratches those same kind of itches, especially Doom the Dark Ages.
This is a thing that I think comes up when people are talking about Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, which are both well-loved games, right? But they also sometimes feel like there's a little bit of a schism between them. They're kind of
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Become important. Why do you think that is? Where do you land in that conversation between those two past Doom games? And then also, where do you think the Dark Ages fits between?
Yeah, well, like I said,
I am ready to put on a show!
So Doom Eternal is, you know, the pinnacle, I'd say.
This is
shooter for me. Like, it's probably my favorite shooter of all time. But it is interesting because, you know, you look at the Metacritic of Doom Eternal, and you would think that it is universally beloved. But everyone that I personally talk to has a divisive opinion on it. They either really, really love it, or they're like, man, it's just not in 2016, man.
I'm ready to put on a show.
The reality is that, you know, Doom has changed. Every iteration of Doom has been kind of the same core, but it's been kind of a different flavor. And some people just don't like the flavor of Doom Eternal. They don't like, you know, having to constantly be low on ammo on certain weapons that they like using. They don't like, you know, having to quickly swap between two weapons to burst down really tough enemies. And, you know, they might not like just the fact that you have to constantly be double jumping, constantly dashing, constantly, you know, on the move to avoid dying in that game. Doom Eternal is also very hard. I would say Doom the Dark Ages brings down the difficulty substantially compared to Doom Eternal, and that might be something that people might not really appreciate about it. But I kind of look at it as, you know, this is doing something different that I can still appreciate, and Doom Eternal still exists. I can still go back to Doom Eternal and play that anytime I want. But this is fun in a different way. A different but similar way.
In your review, you do talk about this idea that, you know, there's this huge arsenal, all the weapons are fun, all the weapons stay relevant late into the game, are used in these sort of specialized scenarios where they're better or worse, or you might prefer one or the other. But I do want to know, because this is going to be a question, right? You got to have a favorite. You got to have something that just made you smile to use it. What weapon do you just want to gush about?
I mean, I mentioned it so many times in the review, but the Super Shotgun, man, there's just something about id shotguns that is just so satisfying. It's hard to beat, man. It's hard to beat just getting up in someone's face, blasting 50 pellets into their giant bloated chest, and then just watching them explode.
Well, I guess the only question I'm left with is, you know, Final Fantasy 16 kind of morphed from an RPG into an action game, and Doom has morphed from a shooter to an action game. So is Devil May Cry just the end point of all video games? Is the real thing we have to be wondering at this point?
You know what? If we're moving towards a perfect world, I would say I would like to see that.
Well, Mitchell, thank you so much for chatting with me a little bit more about your review, your tastes. If you want more from Mitchell, his last review was Fatal Fury City of the Wolves. You can check out that. We have another conversation about that game and there. If you want more action shootery type games, we recently reviewed La Chimera and Shotgun Cop Man. Check both of those out as well. Shotgun Cop Man, also a game where you're shooting shotguns in hell. So
that game is so cool, man. I want to play that so bad. I just haven't had time.
Well, maybe now the review's done.
The right
Yeah, probably
can
not.
make all the difference.
I got another one coming up.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Well, keep an eye out for that one and any other games on IGN.
Open your eyes. Reality is but
What's a measly little 5 years between Doom games? Any more these days, a half decade between entries in a big game franchise feels darn near rushed. And while I personally find it nuts that much time has passed since I reviewed Doom Eternal, this is one series I'm willing to wait for whatever's next to finish cooking before taking a bite. And for 2025, the folks at id Software have pieced together a fine meal indeed in the form of Doom, the Quake heretic painkiller of Witchhaven. But they just call it the Dark Ages. Yes, finally, Doom has gone dark, and you don't even need a flashlight to see it. The jokes aside, all you need is a quick glance at all this to realize Doom the Dark Ages is a wild departure for the series, in terms of both setting and aesthetics, but also gameplay, going for a completely different combat routine than any of the previous entries. Is it a change for the better? It's certainly a change for the different. If nothing else, props to the devs for giving the status quo the finger and shaking up the formula this dang much. But at the same time, as a lifelong Doom enjoyer since the first in 1993, my skepticism was high leading up to its launch. and I remain slightly mixed on a few things in Dark Ages, even after spending 16 hours playing it to completion. But granted, what's here is quite good, but I have a few notable asterisks that we'll get to, much of it surrounding the theming and the story, which, yeah, story mode is all you get this time. There's not even a fortress base between levels or challenge areas to practice in, and no multiplayer at all. Kinda crazy from the series that invented deathmatch. Instead, the focus is entirely on the single-player campaign in Dark Ages. What a bonkers one it is. That said, this review will not be diving into major plot point spoilers or even boss battles. Not only because I don't want to ruin anything, but it's part of the agreement when receiving an early review copy from Bethesda, as I did here. However, everything I'm about to say is my own opinion. Bethesda and it had zero editorial input, and they'll see this for the first time alongside me. Right. So, since there's only the 22 level campaign to cover, let's get to it. Beginning with these greatly expanded difficulty options. Not only do you have 6 presets, but each one can be tweaked and adjusted with surprisingly granular detail. Not something to worry about too much at the start, since these can be changed anytime during the game, which we'll come back to. For now, though, the story begins with some classic medieval fantasy intro text, making it clear that Mars and Earth aren't involved at all here. Instead, Hell's legions are descending upon the realm of Ardent Demure in a vague time period known as the Age of Fire and Ruin. Next is a brief in-engine cinematic showing the battle in progress, with humans getting their squishy butts thoroughly handed to them by a bunch of extra hairy demons. Even the Night Sentinels are freaking out, realizing they're thoroughly outmatched and out-haired. They see no choice but to call upon their naked allies, who currently have in their possession the ultimate devil-killing super weapon, the Doom Slayer. Yeah, while it's the same Doom guy we've grown to know and love, this is an earlier, hairier version of it. Just look at those shiny furs. I know it's supposed to be a cape, but the way it flows down from his head, I like to think he just has a really, really long mullet. But while the Slayer is more conditioned, vibrant and silky than ever, he's also tethered and bound to an existence of servitude, living only to hack apart the hordes of hell whenever called upon. Finally, he's beamed down to the surface where you take control, equipped with only a shield and a shotgun. And man, the first impression of the new world here is top-notch. The pouring rain, the distant tolling bells, the rumbling thunder, an unsettling crackle of flames burning the remnants of this once thriving town. Now left with nothing but an atmosphere of apocalyptic despair. Honestly, if it weren't for that little animated Doom guy head at the bottom, calling back to the original DOS games, you might easily mistake this for another series entirely. Then take a few steps forward, and you're greeted with a few shambling jerks begging to be blasted to bloody bits. And I gotta admit, I didn't leave this area for a good 5 minutes after noticing the physics. Practically everything that looks like it might break apart will. By gunfire, by shield, by running through it at full speed, an increasingly rare feature in recent years. By the way, I'm playing fully maxed out here on the recently built LGR gaming rig for this review, with 4K DLSS set to quality and no frame generation. But even at more average settings, the id Tech 8 engine graphically looks fantastic, and a bit of that is due to the omnipresent ray tracing, I imagine. Dark Ages won't even start up without an RT-capable GPU, making it the second game I've played with this requirement after the Great Circular Indiana Cojones. But enough geeking out over graphical gravy. The real meat and potatoes of the Dark Ages is its